Hello, YouTube community. I was listening to something on the radio earlier, just some BS about politics, but a point somebody was making concerning economics actually kind of applies to a manifesting principle I talk about, and this whole thing that we say in the community about being ready to receive your manifestation. So, the economic concept the person was talking about was in relation to being rejected for a loan, and that there were a group of 186 black men or black people who I think hired Barack Obama to file a lawsuit that it was discrimination that they got rejected for this loan. And because the company, I'm paraphrasing by the way, but I believe this is the general idea, but because the company, which I believe was Citibank, didn't want to deal with the hassle of going through the lawsuit, they just approved the loans for these people. And the guy was talking about how after some period of time, because the actual issue was that credit and things like that showed that they did not have the financial literacy to maintain and pay back the loan or to maintain the house that they got the loan for. And after a period of time, I think he said it was only 19 of those individuals had paid back the loan and kept the house. And I don't even think it was paying back the loan. I think it was just keeping the house. So they use that to talk about equity and economics and, just certain pressures that policies like to relieve through politics and voting and all of that stuff. But I wanted to relate that particular story to manifesting and why, as the title of this video is, God is blessing you by not blessing you and not giving those things to you. So not only can you lose those things, which is really annoying just in and of itself, but when you lose those things, it drops you back into the state that you were in before you had those things. And this does two things. There's two ways that you can be not ready to receive your manifestation. One way is that you are emotionally attached to the manifestation, and the other thing is you have not been given the practical tools to steward that manifestation once you get it. So when they talked about maintenance of equity and how not everybody starts at the same place, so you need to give more tools and give more resources to the people who are starting lower. I personally believe that's true, but you also want to give tools to people who know how to use them, right? You're not going to give a toddler a knife and tell them to go cut vegetables unless you have first taught them how to cut vegetables, and you're doing so while supervising them. You know what I'm saying? And then even then there are tools for a toddler, like plastic knives and stuff, so that way they cannot hurt themselves but can still get the job done. Like one of the things that parents do is giving plastic knives to cut bananas, and the child learns the skill and practices the skill before using an actual knife. So the same kind of thing works in manifestation, especially with money. And because we tie it to our survival, which is something a lot of people like to manifest because we tie it to our survival, and because we have such an emotional attachment, typically fear-based and survival-based, to money because of the fact that we do need it, or are under the paradigm that we need it. This is the area where I see people struggle most. And the same thing with attachment to love. So usually money and relationship are the two things people consider to be the pinnacle of manifestation. And what I wanted to get into in this video is to make the parallels to that political story the person on the radio was telling. Not only do you lose the manifestation or lose that loan, so to speak, in economic terms, but then you're put back in the same situation that you started in. And something I have talked about in other videos, you're not put back in the same position when you lose something. You're actually put back lower into the system, even if you are physically or visually seeing or experiencing the same thing. And why that happens is because once you have experienced a higher high, which comes with blessing, the gap widens for the highest point of bliss or happiness or joy. So comparatively, that contrast actually feels worse than when you started. So you can go back to the same level of life, but internally it's going to feel worse. So that actually starts regressing you down. If you guys have ever played Chutes and Ladders, it's basically like getting one of the chutes and going back to the starting point. But then that's the point in the game where you'll get frustrated because you're like, oh, I did all this work to get really close to the top, and it all shot down so fast, and now, oh my God, it's going to take twice as long to get back up as it did for me to get knocked down, right? If you're a sore loser like me, that's how I always conceptualized it when I was playing. So I did not have that much fun at that particular game. But the idea is that you're going to be put in an emotional paradigm that is actually lower than where you started, even if you are physically in the same starting position. So what this does is actually lower your vibration, and puts you in a new state that you have not been in before, because you can see a larger contrast and a larger comparative gap. And this rule actually kind of saves people if you're going for something in the divine way, if you're doing it by completely changing your lifestyle and completely changing the way you interact with Source and completely changing the communication and the relationship you have with the divine, because that is the only thing that can lead to maintaining a permanent change with ease without the suffering of having to force the 3D, which is what the majority of society has done up until this point of what I consider grand awakening and the shift from the emotional dark age that we've been in. So when God, Source, whatever, when that entity, the Most High, does not give you a blessing or a short-term gain, it is because Source understands that by giving you such a heightened contrast of blessing, you will later be in a greater amount of suffering if you have not prepared your physical body, your spiritual body, your mind, your heart, whatever, to receive and keep that manifestation. Because a lot of the time, I'm sure you've seen it with people who have lost everything, or the reference many people use that people who win the lottery often go broke. What's happening is you actually go spiritually broke, because your aura is essentially not conditioned as a muscle to lift that sort of spiritual weight. Because when you receive a blessing, what's happening is you clear out all the negativity first, because life is duality, and because we live in duality and can experience both at the same time. What typically happens before you get blessed, and this character development that a lot of spiritual circles talk about, is actually related to turning off the negative impulse that comes with that pair. So when you receive the coin, we'll use money, right? When you receive that quarter, it has heads and tails. But if you only want to experience heads and you don't want to experience tails, you have to desensitize yourself to that half of the coin, because the entire coin is going to come in. It is a package deal. They are mirrored opposites. And in this dual mirror that we live in 3D, you're going to get it as a package deal. So it comes as one complete energy. And what you're doing when you're manifesting is completely unplugging the negative half of it, so that energy is there, but you don't embody it when you manifest. So that requires preparing to receive that next level by desensitizing the negative half first, which will usually come in the form of healing, of a visual paradigm shift, of a heart paradigm shift, of some new download or enlightenment and wisdom that you get from consistently communicating with the divine and developing a relationship with it. And when your body is regulated and conditioned the way that you do with your muscles in the gym, to be desensitized to things like fear, to pride, to shame, to anger, all of that, when that negative impulse is no longer electrically charged, it's essentially a dead impulse. And you need the heart impulse and you need the visual impulse from the mental plane in order to make a manifestation appear in 3D. So typically you'll be trained to shut off the thoughts about it or shut off the emotional response to it, and typically both if you're doing that optimally, and then you're ready to receive the positive half that comes in that package deal, and it will naturally sustain itself in that positive experience. So I just wanted to touch on that because this story reminded me of that principle that Source has told me before, but I've never actually spoken about this with people. So I wanted to elaborate on it a little bit so that people can truly understand that Source is actually waiting to bless you. And is very patient in that waiting process to bless you, and source is not out to get you, and source is not out to punish you. And typically, if you're not being blessed in the way that you prefer, it's typically because there is some sort of character development or some healing, especially emotional healing, that you need to get through. Even, you know, when we say emotional healing, we think it's just relational related, but maybe it's your emotional relationship to money. Are you codependent on money? Are you irritated and angry when you don't have it, and then only feeling heightened pleasure sensations when you have a ton of it, right? So that shows emotional codependency on money. That is also an emotional healing issue, right? That's one example. And I like to use money and relationship because those are the main two things that people really want to manifest. But typically speaking, before you receive a blessing, you need some emotional healing and desensitization and training that manifestation muscle before you receive it, because God doesn't want you in heightened contrast receiving a new high in life and then having a come down that feels like utter suffering. And it will happen if you don't know how to steward that manifestation.